2, 1.
Hi, good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting in conversation with Gerardo Hernández and with Richard Burgon MP. My name's Rob Miller and I'm the director of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign here in Britain, and I'll be chairing the event tonight. And I'm really delighted to welcome Gerardo Hernández and Richard Burgon MP to the meeting, and also Her Excellency Barbara Montalvo Alvarez, the Cuban ambassador to the UK. So I'm very pleased that you can all join us. Now, some people have sent us some questions in advance, but if there's any time, we will also put up some of your questions to the panel at the end of the meeting. So please do post them to the chat box in YouTube if you have any questions for the panelists tonight. This meeting is taking place on Jitsi to enable Gerardo to join us from Cuba, and it is being live streamed directly to YouTube. And many of you, I'm sure, will know that one element of the illegal US blockade of Cuba is that Zoom, along with many other internet platforms, are blocked by the sanctions for use in Cuba. At the moment, YouTube is still available in Cuba. So a very, very big welcome to all of our friends in Cuba, and indeed to all of you across the world who are joining us on YouTube tonight. We're aiming to finish the meeting by 7:45 or 2:45 in Havana and in Cuba. So first of all, it's a real honor and a privilege to be able to introduce our first guest, Gerardo Hernández, who joins us live from Havana this evening. And I'm sure that Gerardo needs little introduction for many of our audience. But for anyone who is new to the campaign and to Cuba, Gerardo is one of the Miami Five, or the Cuban Five, or Los Cinco, as they are known in Cuba. And in the 1990s, when Florida-based terrorist groups were carrying out terrorist attacks and bombings inside Cuba, the Five went undercover and they traveled to the United States to infiltrate those groups to try and prevent and to warn of future attacks against Cuba. When they were finally discovered, the FBI arrested the Five rather than the terrorists themselves. And the Five spent more than 13 years in US high security jails. The US government also cruelly denied a visitation visa to Gerardo's wife, Adriana, so she was unable to see him for 12 years. The Cuba Solidarity Campaign was part of an international campaign for their freedom, and all Five were finally freed in December 2014 as part of the deal between Cuba and the US to re-establish diplomatic relations. Gerardo, it really is wonderful that you can join us tonight, and I'd like to start the meeting tonight by asking you this question. How are things in Cuba today? With COVID-19, I know it's difficult, but how are you coping, you and your family? Gerardo.
Well, first, it is great to see you all, and I couldn't say anything else but to thank you, because just in a couple of days, it's going to be December 17th, and I would like to thank all our friends in Britain and everybody in Cuban Solidarity Campaign for making possible that the Five are in Cuba today. Cuba is doing well. In brief, we are still coping with the COVID-19, as you know, and most of all, we're still coping with the US blockade, which makes everything very difficult. Somebody would expect that in these hard times for the world with the pandemic like COVID-19, there's going to be a little humanity and say, well, you know what, we have this little country blockade, let's have a break, let's them have their needs, drugs, medicines, etc. Let's have a break, let's have a timeout in the blockade, but nothing like that happened. All the contrary, just in the few months, around 200 new measures by the Trump administration were set in place against Cuba. So coping with the COVID-19 for us has been even more difficult. Every is difficult here, but the Cuban people take every opportunity to grow, and we have demonstrated once again that this is a great people, a people ready to resist everything. And I can tell you the numbers are improving. We are having less cases now, a little grow in cases since we are opening to tourism, but in a general sense we have it under control. And a main role in this besides our health care system, of course, is the participation of the people and our mass organizations, including CDRs, because as you know, we have that neighbors organization in every neighborhood, in every community, in every street in our cities, and that has helped a lot. We have people going to every house, knocking on doors, knowing who are the families that need special help, special care. I can tell you, we have people from the CDR going house by house and making learning who are those people, disability people, elderly people, families in need that, for example, we need to go to a pharmacy and get the drugs for those people, so they don't need to go out to the street, or in many cases buying their food for them and taking their food to their own houses, so they don't have to go to the street and get it themselves. I'm talking about elderly people, sick people, and once again, it is demonstrated how important it is for a country to have an organization like CDRs that know who are the people in need. They know because they are the neighbors, they are the same neighbors, so nobody could know better than them who are the people that are really in need for those special treatment. And together with our health system, that I have to say, our government and our healthcare system have made an enormous effort to guarantee the same care to everybody. As you know, in Cuba, healthcare is free. It's not free for the government. We have to pay for the tests. We have to pay for the drugs, for the equipment and everything in the middle of the blockade that made it even difficult for us to have artificial ventilators for people that need them. So Cuban scientists have been working very hard to create our own ventilators, and of course to discover a vaccine that would be helpful. Right now we have 4 vaccine candidates that we have been working in very hard to have the chance to vaccinate our population. But in a general sense, I have to tell you, we're doing good. And when you compare the numbers with all other Latin American countries and in the rest of the world, we are doing good. We are doing a great effort. And as I said, it is only possible with the participation of our entire population.
Well, thank you, Gerardo. We've had a number of meetings on the COVID response in Cuba, and the figures from Cuba and the response from Cuba has been truly amazing, not only domestically within Cuba, but internationally. And we will touch on some of the international work that Cuba has been doing in the next few days. And it truly is a remarkable track and trace system. I like to think of it as a people-led track and trace system you have in Cuba, with the involvement of all the population of Cuba. It's the bedrock really of your COVID-19 response, that participation. Just moving on to obviously the history. You mentioned December the 17th is the 6th anniversary of your return and your compatriots' return to Cuba, and it was an incredible moment for everyone around the world to see you arriving back in Havana after so many years of campaigning and struggling for your release. Can you remind our viewers this evening a little bit about that day itself, the events of that day, your return to Cuba, and how that felt for you personally after so long being incarcerated in the United States?
Well, as you know, two of the Cuban 5, two of the Miami 5, Rene and Fernando, had already served their sentence and were in Cuba. And 3 of us remain in prison, Ramon, Antonio, and myself. Ramon and Antonio had beaten the life sentences in the appeal, but they were serving long sentences. And in my case, I was serving 2 life sentences plus 15 years. That means I had to die twice and still have to serve 15 more years. And the return was, even though we came to Cuba together, there was a little difference. It all started on the 15th. Antonio and Ramon were notified in the respective prisons. The three of us were in different prisons. I had been for the last 12 years in Victorville maximum security prison in California. And Antonio and Ramon, they were notified on December 15th. They were told, get your stuff together, you're moving. None of us knew where we're going to or what for. They were told, get your stuff, we're moving. And then they were transferred to a prison in North Carolina. The three of us arrived on the 15th to that prison without knowing. And we spent that night in that prison without knowing that all of us were there. But my story had started 11 days before. On December 4th, I don't even was told to get my stuff together. I just got caught and put in the plane. I don't even have an idea what for. It was all very weird because usually when a prisoner is moved, at least you got a chance to get your little stuff together, and they tell you you are moving. They never said where, but at least you know you're moving. And in my case, we're all very different. And they moved me to a prison in Oklahoma and put me there for 11 days in a hole, what prisoners call a hole, which was a punishment cell, an isolation cell. And I spent there 11 days without knowing why I was there or what for or where I was going to. Nobody said anything to me, no explanation at all. So it was very hard time. Could you imagine 11 days without knowing anything about nothing, and not even whether you're going to be there half an hour or 3 days or whatever? They didn't tell me anything. And after 11 days was already the 15th, and then was when we were moved together to a prison in North Carolina, which was a prison hospital. We spent that night there, and next morning, each of us were told, hey, get dressed, somebody wants to talk to you. So they cuffed me up, or put all the chains and everything, and escorted me through a hall. And then in the middle of the hall, they unchained me, uncuffed me, which was very weird. And there were some people there. They said there was from the State Department, who knows? And they said, let's go to this room over here because you're gonna have a video conference with Havana. And at that moment, I saw Antonio coming and I saw Ramon coming. We haven't seen each other for 12 years. I mean, they have seen when they went taken to court for the appeal, but since I was not taken to the appeal, I haven't seen them for 12 years. So we sat in that room and have a video conference just like this one with somebody in Cuba that said, hey, can you listen to me? Can you see me? Yes. Well, I want to tell you that after a long process of negotiation between the two countries, we have reached an agreement, and you are going to be free, and you're going to be in Cuba on December 17th. But since I was coming from 11 days in the punishment cell, I not even knew what day was. So I remember I asked Ramon, what day is today? And he said, 16. And I said, wow, tomorrow we're going to be in Cuba. So it was a very happy moment. And believe me, at that moment, I thought of everybody in Cuba and abroad, every person that we know that had been working so hard for our freedom. Because remember, we have been taken to punishment cells several times through all those years for nothing, for no reason. And each time, the support of our friends around the world grew and gave us strength to resist all those horrible moments. So at that time, when we already were sure that we were coming to Cuba, we felt a huge debt of gratitude to all our friends, our companies like you in Britain that have worked so hard for our freedom. Remember, I even received in prison the visit of our friend Tony Woolley on behalf of many friends in Britain. Father Bottoms from London visited me, and the message of solidarity from our friends in Britain was always present through our time in prison. So that day we were told, and next morning on December 17, 2014, we got chained again and were put in the plane back to Cuba. We made the whole trip handcuff and chains in our legs and full of chains. The chains were only removed when the plane landed in Cuba. And I can tell you that having been able of seeing Cuba again and feel Cuba again and being back to our people, that's probably the happiest day of our lives.
Well, Gerardo, the way you talk about it sends shivers, down my spine. Really, I mean, I've spent time with you in the streets in Havana, and it's very difficult to move around Havana with you because you are like for people who don't know, you are like a rock star in Cuba, and you have to stop every 10 paces to have your photos taken. And the one word that every Cuban says when you or Rene or Antonio Ramon are there is thank you, gracias, because they know, like we do, that you put your life on hold to safeguard the well-being of the Cuban people. And for that, I'm sure they will be eternally grateful. Just to say that we have got people from all over the world, from Ireland, Canada, the US, Wales, from Sweden, from every part. And we have so many messages, Gerardo, for you and Adriana and the family, wishing you well. And so pleased to see you here tonight. So thank you so much again. I'm going to move on to Richard now to ask a question. We'll come back to Gerardo later on in the meeting. Richard, you are the elected member of parliament. Just to introduce you for Leeds East, you were elected in 2015. But I think it's really important to say that not only are you a wonderful member of parliament, but that you were involved in the solidarity work and in the campaign for freedom for the Miami Five well before becoming elected as a member of parliament. And we're very, very grateful for your support for the campaign before you became elected member of parliament, and of course now. So it's great to have you with us tonight. We're really very, very pleased. I remember you speaking at a Miami Five vigil, a rally outside the United States Embassy one cold night alongside Irma Gonzalez, one of the daughters of Rene Gonzalez, back in 2010. And you were involved. I remember working with you before then. Can you tell us a little about from your own perspective, what inspired you to get involved with Cuba, with solidarity, with the campaign against the blockade, and of course, the campaign for freedom for the Miami Five? What brought you to this campaign?
Well, reading about the incredible record of putting the principles of socialism into practice in Cuba and with Cuba's internationalism as well is what got me interested in the history of the Cuban Revolution. And before I was elected as a member of parliament, one of the members of parliament for my city, many years before that, I was indeed secretary of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign Group for Leeds, my city here in England. And reading about the internationalism of the Cuban Revolution, the way the Cuban Revolution helped to defeat apartheid. And of course, Gerardo played a role in that through going to Angola, where the Cubans struck a decisive blow against apartheid in South Africa. And that, of course, was recognized by Nelson Mandela. But also, fundamentally, seeing how the Cuban Revolution managed to achieve so much with the greatest power in the history of the planet right on its doorstep. And all the socialist governments in Latin America, virtually every socialist government in Latin America throughout the 50s onwards, sadly fell, or rather was toppled. We see the experience in the 50s in Guatemala. We see the experience in the 70s in Chile. But throughout that, Cuba managed to succeed. And reading about those struggles, reading about the resistance at the Bay of Pigs, reading about also how Cuba beat all the experts, because when the Soviet Union collapsed, I actually have a book which I bought secondhand upstairs called Castro's Final Hour. I'm just putting on record I bought it secondhand, not from the author themselves, but the book says, this was after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that within a matter of months of this book going into print, the Cuban socialist system will collapse, capitalism will come back to Cuba. It says all the experts agree, and this book is telling us how this is going to happen. Well, decades later, some 30 years later, the Cuban Revolution, despite the odds, is still going strong. And perhaps one of the most inspiring things that I read about growing up was not only the success of the Cuban revolutionaries in the Cuban Revolutionary War in the 1950s, but also the triumph of the Cuban people through the special period, when virtually nobody on the planet believed that Cuban socialism would survive, but it did. And so the story, right from the storming of the Moncada barracks on the 26th of July 1953, right through to surviving the special period, and then in the decade before that, contributing to the fall of apartheid, the internationalism shown with Operation Miracle, restoring the eyesight to people in different parts of the country, the internationalism of the Henry Reed Brigade, all of these things got me inspired to support the Cuban Revolution. I was very lucky to go to Cuba on 5 occasions as well, firstly on holiday, then on a fundraising solidarity cycle trip, and to meet Cubans and to listen to them and to hear their views and become friends with Cubans who, like people here, recognize that not everything's perfect in their country, but were proud of their system, proud of its achievements, and were firm in their belief that it should be the Cuban people that decide the future of Cuba, not people in the United States of America.
Brilliant, Richard. Thank you so much for those comments. And we're all very much, I'm sure, hoping that we can all visit you in Cuba, Gerardo, soon. And we're sure that will be a possible thing. We'll come back to you in a moment, Richard. But it's been mentioned a couple of times about COVID, coronavirus, and Cuba's work at home and abroad. And I'm really, really grateful and very pleased that Richard has become the latest member of Parliament in this country to formally nominate the Cuban medics, the Cuban Henry Reed International Medical Brigade, for the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize. It's a wonderful tribute to those doctors who have traveled to nearly 40 countries now across the globe, helping people in countries, even in Europe, in countries like Italy and Andorra, to fight back against coronavirus. And so the campaign that we've organised has asked for members of Parliament and academics to nominate for the Peace Prize. And so far we've got 10 members of Parliament, including Scottish parliamentarians, who have nominated, and another 6 academics from the UK who have nominated. And we're still encouraging people to nominate right up until the end of January 21, which is the deadline. But we've also got an online petition which backs that campaign, has been signed by almost 7,000 people now. And I'm asking all of you tonight on this meeting, there's around 200 of you here already, if you haven't already signed that petition, please do sign the petition. The links will be going up now in the chat boxes, and you can sign that petition and add your endorsement to that call to nominate the Cuban doctors, nurses and technicians for their work over so many years. Please do so if you haven't done so already, and share those details if you can. Returning to you, Gerardo, you've been back in Cuba now for 6 years, nearly 6 years. Can you, I didn't introduce you formally in all your capacity. I know you're a member of Parliament, but right now you've been elected recently into a very interesting role. But could you tell us a little bit more about the work you've been doing in the last few years in Cuba and what you're doing right now.
Let me say that we Cubans are very proud of our doctors, and they really deserve that nomination. So thank you all very much for your efforts on behalf of all Cubans. As you said, it's been 6 years now since we are back in Cuba, and I spent some years working as a vice dean in the Higher Institute of Foreign Relations in Havana, which is the diplomatic academy where I myself studied and graduated from, as well as Fernando. We both graduated from that International Relations Institute back in the late 90s. So I was happy to be designated vice dean at that institute and spent 4 years working there with the youth, with the students that are going to be our future diplomats and are going to represent Cuba in the foreign relations around the world in just a few years. And it was an amazing experience for me working with those young people, because they demonstrated that the future of the revolution is in good hands. I can tell there's a lot of compromise, a lot of commitment in that generation. And working in that institute with the young people, we went through many important successes, like, for example, the coup in Bolivia and the sad event of passing of Fidel. And I had the chance to live those events, historic events, together with those young people, to know how they felt, to know how they react. And I'm very optimistic of the new generations of our revolution. It was a great experience having been able to work in the university with the young people. And as you mentioned, I a few months ago received a new responsibility. I was elected first vice coordinator, national coordinator of the CDRs, which are the committees for the defense of the revolution. And a few months after that, I was elected national coordinator of that organization. The CDRs, of Committee for the Defense of the Revolution, were founded by Fidel on September 28, 1960. It was a historic speech by Fidel in front of around 1 million people in Havana, huge crowd. There are some images of that speech. Fidel had just came back from United Nations and were changing with the Cuban people his impressions. And in the middle of the speech, some bombs exploded, placed in the surroundings by the enemies of the revolution. So when the sound of those bombs were listened to, Fidel said, "Those are the enemies of the revolution. They want to destroy the revolution. We need an organization in every neighborhood. We need an organization in every street of Cuba, a neighbors organization to take care of every neighbor, to defend every neighbor, to defend every street, because the revolution had to be defended by the people in every neighborhood." And that was the origin of the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution, which I know that you guys know very well, because I have had the opportunity of being here with the Cuba Solidarity Campaign brigades and visiting some CDRs and exchanging with the people on their street, on their neighborhoods. And it's a very important organization. I already mentioned the important role that the CDRs have been developing with the COVID-19, against the COVID-19 pandemic, working in every neighborhood, in every street, in every corner with the Cuban people, helping the people in need. Historically, that organization have been doing some very important missions. Every time that, for example, there is a vaccination campaign in Cuba, the CDR has a very important role organizing the people, organizing the neighbors, letting the healthcare authorities know where the children are, organizing them. It's a community organization that has a very, very important role. For example, we do campaigns to collect blood donations for the healthcare system, and we organize the neighbors that want to donate their blood to save lives. Those are among the main tasks of the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution, and of course, keeping the watch in our neighbors against people that again wants to do just that, create problems and attack many times in violent forms the revolution. So basically, that's what I've been doing in these last years. First, as a vice dean of the International Institute for Foreign Relations, and now as a national coordinator of the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution, which I have to say is a job that I like because I have to be in contact with the people all time, many cities, all cities and neighborhoods around the country. So it's a work that I really love.
Brilliant. I mean, it's for anyone who goes to Cuba, I mean, meeting with the CDRs is a real honor, because you are meeting obviously the people of Cuba in their neighborhoods, in their houses, and it really is a wonderful experience, and you really get to feel what the revolution means for ordinary people of Cuba. It's a pride of their country, of their neighborhood, of their family, and of their friends, and it must be an incredibly exciting role. One of the things that we were very interested in is a project the CDRs are working on at the moment to do with growing things in the community, Crece su pedacito. Could you tell us a little bit about that project? I think it's called Grow Your Bit, really, is the project. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because it sounds very exciting.
It's a campaign impulse created by the CDR to motivate neighbors to grow their own food. You know that Cuba is under a blockade. It has been for many years. Actually, I was not born when the blockade was set in place, and I am 55 years old now. So I don't know what it is to live in a country not blockaded. Just for you to have an idea how many Cuban generations have had to suffer the American blockade, the US blockade against us. So one of the things that the blockade makes very difficult for Cubans is the access to food, because people could say, all right, Cuba is an island with land and has good weather. You can grow a lot of foods, but remember, food needs chemicals, it needs products, needs machinery, and all that is very, very difficult for Cuba to get because of the US blockade. So it's been very difficult for us to meet all the necessities of products for our food. And we are encouraging people to try to grow their own food in their neighborhoods. There are places, many places in our neighborhoods that are either small spaces between one building and another one, or backyards, little backyards in people's houses, even common places that have been used to dispose garbage and create vectors and rats and things like that. We encourage people, we encourage neighbors to get together, clean out those places, and convert disposal places, trash places, convert them in places where they grow their own food. And I'm happy to tell you that that initiative is very popular now among Cubans in their neighborhoods. And every day there are more people that get together to clean a space in their streets, in their neighborhoods, even in pots, in balconies. People get all containers, pots, and they put it in balconies and grow their seasons, tomatoes, vegetables. It's a movement that people have assumed with happiness, because you can see the results. Their neighbors now collecting their own food, and not only that, there are people now that are going to another stage, which is getting those products and getting some culture on it, packaging, selling them for very accessible prices to the neighbors. In some time they exchange, they donate to schools, they donate to elderly houses in the neighborhoods, they donate to hospitals, and that makes people feel important. That makes people feel that they are contributing to the needs of the country, and of course solving some of their own problems in terms of access to vegetables and some other products. It's a movement that has been growing around the country, and the CDRs are proud to be supporting Cultiva tu Pedacito, which is the name of it.
Brilliant. It sounds like a wonderful project, and we look forward to finding out more and contributing ourselves to that particular project, because I know there's a lot of optimism in Cuba's response to the environment, which we could have a whole meeting on here with Project Tarea and the Organoponicos and just the whole response of Cuba to that climate crisis that we face. But before we move on to a couple more questions, I have to ask for people's support. As you know, the Cuba Solidarity Campaign would normally be out at conferences and events around the country, but we, like everybody else, are unable to do that, and we're trying to keep in touch with people through online campaigning and events such as this. But all of this, as you know, costs money, and money is unfortunately something we are going to ask you for. If you have any possibilities to make donations, be they small or whatever you can afford, we would be very, very grateful for any small contributions that you can give. I know there are links coming up now on YouTube to encourage you to do so if you can. And I know that most of you already give and support our work. But if you can at this time spare any small donation, it all makes a difference. So thank you to anyone who can contribute to the work of the campaign. It's very gratefully received. Okay, back to Gerardo before I go to Richard. But back to Gerardo, you were in Cuba when the diplomatic relations were finally restored with the United States. And you were there, I know, when President Obama visited Havana with his Michelle and the dogs and the children and the entourage. We all watched as that unfolded. And Obama was a very, very different president, of course, to Donald Trump in many ways. But and of course, what I wanted to ask you was, how have the last 4 years impacted on the lives of Cubans? And we know very well, but if you could give us some of your thoughts. And then also, could you say a little bit about the recent election of Joe Biden, and how that news has been received by the people in Cuba?
Well, the news that of the election of Joe Biden as the president of the US is being received in Cuba with cautious optimism, because on one side, you say, well, he was the vice president of Obama. It is supposed to resume to retake some of the measures of that administration, which, as you know, led both countries to get a little more closer, and there were more trips allowed to Cuba. They installed the embassies in both countries. The relations were established. No doubt there was some improvement in relations between the two countries, and even the Cuban Americans living in the U.S. were able to have more exchange with their families, and in little wars, both people were closer, as is supposed to be, because we are a country that are only 90 miles from one another, and we don't have the Cuban people and the U.S. people don't have any animosity. It's only that history has made the successive U.S. administration try to undermine the Cuban Revolution. So on one side, people here said, well, it has to be better than this Trump administration that has been awful in terms of relation with Cuba. But on the other side, that optimism is cautious, because the system is the system. Joe Biden is not the imperialist. Joe Biden is not the system. Joe Biden is a person, and he has to move with the system rules. And we don't believe that because Joe Biden is elected, the imperialism will desist in its idea of defeating, undermining the Cuban Revolution. So we have to be cautious with our optimism. But again, logic says that his administration, in terms of relation with Cuba, must be better than the Trump administration that have been awful. The Trump administration, on regard to Cuba, has been, in my opinion, one of the worst ever. He aligned his administration with the Cuban American mafia that has an industry living out of the hatred against Cuba. It's a way of living there, the hatred against Cuba. They don't care about the Cuban people. They just care about their agenda. And that's what the Trump administration has done. They stopped every little window opened by the Obama administration, every measure trying to put together, to make closer the relation between the Cuban people and the American people, were shut down by the Trump administration. So again, in that regard, we expect the next administration to be better, but also we are cautious because the system is the system, and Cuba is something that they are not ready to tolerate. They are, in my opinion, they are not ready to agree on our disagreements and to live under respect to our sovereignty again. But let's see what happens.
Well, we think you're right to be cautious before you're optimistic, but hopefully cautious optimism is a good way. And Richard, I wanted to come to you on the same similar theme. I know you follow the role of the US administration, not just vis-a-vis Cuba, but across the region in Latin America, and you've seen what the administration has done over the past 4 years. I'm just wondering what you, as a member of the British Parliament, would like to see from the new administration in the White House next year when they come into office. How would you like them to relate to Cuba and Latin America? But also, at the end, a bit about what you would like to see the British government do vis-a-vis Cuba and Latin America. Well,
at the last general election here in the UK, which unfortunately Labour didn't win, we were led by Jeremy Corbyn, a socialist, anti-war internationalist, and anti-imperialist, if you will. And we made clear that we wanted an independent foreign policy, whereas regardless of who was in the White House in the USA, that wouldn't determine what the attitude of our country is to other countries. Now, of course, I very much welcome the fact that Trump has been booted out. I remember too how welcome it was when there were positive moves towards Cuba by the Obama administration. And of course, all of those who believe in Cuba's self-determination, all of those of us who believe in the self-determination of countries in Latin America and the social gains of the Cuban Revolution being able to be preserved, all of us hope that those positive aspects of the Obama administration are continued and resumed under Joe Biden. But of course, it won't be a surprise to you that I agree with Gerardo when he says that one individual is not the system. And at a time when the United States, I feel, feels vulnerable on a geopolitical level, feels that it is not economically dominant to the extent it would like to be. There is, of course, a danger of a new Cold War developing between the USA and China, and there can be proxy hostilities within that framework, of course. But let's hope and let's campaign for the Biden administration to continue the positive advances in the relationship with Cuba that were made under Obama's administration. That will make a big difference for people in Cuba. It'll make a big difference, of course, to relatives of Cubans living in the United States of America as well. In relation to our own government, as I say, I think we should have an independent foreign policy. And our own Prime Minister has been a bit Trump-like in some of his pronouncements in general. But I very much welcome the fact that the UK government votes against the blockade when it comes up at the United Nations. I think that's important. And I do know as well that the British government placed on record in our Parliament the gratitude of the British government and the British people for the assistance Cuba gave when there was the ship off the coast of Cuba with people on it who needed assistance because of coronavirus. Know all that.
Live streaming is on.
Thank you, Richard. And I think it's really wonderful, your words about the British government. And we've been very pleased and very forthright in our praise of the British government, because in this current crisis, when the Cuban doctors are travelling across the world, it's been noticed that the British government has cooperated directly with the Cuban government, who have sent medical brigades to 4 British overseas territories, Turks and Caicos, Anguilla, Montserrat, and also the Virgin Islands. So there are now Cuban doctors working on those British overseas territories in the Caribbean. And that's a direct cooperation between our government. We very much welcome that cooperation and hope, as you do, that independent policy will continue going forward. I know, Richard, you have met Gerardo on a number of occasions. I wondered if there were any questions that you wanted to put to Gerardo or say directly to Gerardo at this time.
Well, of course, it's fantastic to see you, Gerardo, here in person via the magic of Jitsi in Havana, and to hear your reflections, not only on your experience infiltrating terrorist groups in Miami, but also your experience now as a member of the National Assembly in Cuba, the work that's been done by the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution, and the work in relation to people growing their own food as part of a better future in Cuba, despite the blockade. The question I wanted to ask you about really was in relation to your involvement in Angola. 2 quotes that stick in my mind always from my reading about Cuba was a famous quote from Jose Marti that Fidel often repeated, in which Jose Marti said, "Humanity is our homeland." And for me, that's internationalism described in one sentence. Humanity is our homeland. Another thing I remember was reading about the many volunteers who, like yourself, went to Angola. I remember reading that many of the Cuban volunteers were Black Cubans. And one Black Cuban who went to Angola recalled a speech given by Fidel Castro to the volunteers that were going to go to Angola. And Fidel reflected upon the fact and I think these were his words, that your ancestors came to Cuba from Africa as slaves. You return to Africa from Cuba as liberators. You are fighting imperialism. And I think it was that kind of concept and the awareness of the Cuban people about injustice globally that must have inspired so many Cubans to volunteer. So I wanted to ask you about what inspired you to go to Angola, your reflections on your involvement in Angola, and of course, who would have predicted at the time that you were fighting injustice in Angola, that years later you would be you'd have to take on the role of an opponent of the revolution, at least in terms of convincing people in these dreadful terrorist groups in Miami so that you could gain information to prevent brutal terrorist attacks. So if you could reflect upon your experience in Angola and your motivations, both I and I think the viewers would be fascinated to hear it.
I'm going to tell you my experience, but I know because having talked to many of my compatriots, I know that it's the case of many Cubans that are internationalists that have been in Africa and other places. I know the reflection could be very similar than the one I'm going to express. I always, when I grew up, I always wanted to be like the people that in our history sacrificed themselves for our country. I always wanted to be one of those people fighting in Bay of Pigs or Playa Girón when the invasion from the US. I always wanted to be one of the people going to Sierra Maestra with Fidel to fight. I always wanted to be one of the people that assaulted the Moncada barracks. But those are special occasions in history. And of course, my generation was not part of it. So when we had the opportunity of going to Africa and help to maintain the independence in those countries, we not even think twice about it. As you mentioned, Martí said that homeland is humanity. And also Fidel said that being internationalist is paying our own debt with humanity, because Cuba has received a lot of solidarity itself, and you are proof of that. You are one example of that, how even today Cuba continue to receive the solidarity of countries and friends around the world. So that's our debt and duty to pay that solidarity back. And also, as you mentioned, we in Cuba have a very huge mixture of races. Even myself, that used to be blonde and clear eyes, I have black blood in my veins. So we are just fighting for, we were just fighting for our people. We were just defending our own people, and that's how we felt. And for the thousands of Cubans that participated in that struggle against the apartheid regime in Africa, they say that the thousands of Cuban doctors today and workers of other sectors that goes abroad to serve other countries is an honor. It's a matter of honor, because not only we know that we are helping our own country, but we know that we are helping our largest motherland, as Martí mentioned, which is humankind.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gerardo, for that wonderful response, and for the question, Richard. For the hundreds of you now watching on the YouTube channel, if you can share this meeting at this stage on social media, that would be great. And if you can also subscribe to the Cuba Solidarity Campaign YouTube channel, there's loads of really good videos, and all the videos of our past Zoom and Jitsi meetings are on there also, so you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm very pleased that we have with us Her Excellency Barbara Montalvo Alvarez, who's going to say a few words now. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for being with us.
No, are you listening? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Rob, for the opportunity to take part in this meeting with Gerardo MP Richard Burgon. I'm really moved. When, as you said, when Gerardo, Ramon, and Antonio descended the stairs of the plane that took them to Cuba, the best feelings of friendship, solidarity, and support emerged all over the world. Injustice was fixed, and dialogue proved better than confrontation. If you don't mind, I also take advantage of this opportunity because this might be one of the last online meetings of 2020, and to thank the Cuban Solidarity Campaign and all participants in these events for your permanent support, and especially for the nominations of the Henry Reef Brigade for the Peace Nobel Prize. I wish a Merry Christmas and the best possible New Year 2021 for all of you. You know, for Cubans, it's more than that because we will be celebrating the 62nd anniversary of the revolution. Really, this has been indeed a memorable afternoon for everyone, and I'm very moved, and I'm an honor for me to share this moment with Gerardo and all of you. Really, thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and it's lovely to see you here this evening. And I hope we can speak before the new year. But certainly, best wishes to you and all of your staff at the embassy. Just very briefly, I'd like to thank. We're not wrapping up now, but I want to get this in quickly. I'd like to thank Simon, who stepped in to help us to host this meeting, and I want to pass on our very best wishes to Ryan Smith, who works for Cuba Solidarity Campaign. I know you're watching Ryan now, but Ryan was taken into hospital over the weekend with quite a serious situation. So our very best wishes to you, Ryan, at this time, and thank you for all your work, and we wish you all the best over the next few weeks, and we are with you, brother. We are definitely with you, and we'll see you soon, I'm sure. I also want to ask everybody who's watching, if you're not a member of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, you really should be. If you're serious about helping Cuba and giving solidarity, that is the first thing you should certainly do, is to join the campaign. We have over 4,000 members, and I know there are many members here, but also trade union branches from across the country watching tonight. So welcome all of you. But if you're not a member, please join. And we do give lots of goodies. There's a badge and a special bag and all sorts of things. And you get our wonderful magazine, Cuba C, 4 times a year if you join. But above all, you will be joining the fight against the illegal US blockade of Cuba and for the rights of the Cuban people to determine their own future, free from the aggression from outside. We've had quite a few questions. We're not going to be able to take them all, but we will take a couple. We had lots of messages from all over, but the first question we're going to take, and what I think I'll do is I'll take a couple of questions and then maybe see if Richard and Gerardo want to come back on those and say anything there. We have a fabulous question from Nancy Cohn, who is watching from Indianapolis in the US. She says, "It's fabulous to see you, Gerardo." She also sent a supplementary question asking if you are still doing cartoons. So I know when you were in prison, you did some wonderful cartoons, which we still use in some of our cars and so on. So she was asking that. But her main question is about, I mean, you've touched on it quite a lot already, so maybe it's covered, but it's about the role of the CDRs and how they help control the spread of COVID in Cuba. I know you've touched on it, but I think when we look at what's happening in this country, and particularly from a US perspective, it's such a different approach between that participatory approach you touched on and the approach you have in our countries. And she wanted a bit more about that. We also have a very specific question from Junior McDougall from South Wales, who again gives you best wishes to you and your family. Lots of comments about your family. wondering why we can't see Adriana and the kids, but maybe another time. You obviously have made a real impact in that regard. Lots of messages there. But this question is about whether you think you would be in prison still if it was not for the intervention, the letter from Pope Francis that was brought to the attention of the administration in the US regarding your case. Whether how important that letter was in there. But I think the final kind of question I've got in front of me now, we might have time for a couple of others, is about Cuba today and the message of Cuba for the world. And that might be something that Richard would want to touch on as well, and how you want to give a message to people around the world about what you're doing in Cuba, and if there are lessons that can be learned for people across the world. So there's a number of questions there that you might want to touch on. So I'll start with Gerardo and then bring in Richard as well, if you want to say a few words as well.
Starting by the end, the letter by Pope was a contribution to our campaign, but we cannot resume or give all the merit to that gesture, because I can tell you it was very important. The meetings that unions in Britain had with persons in the administration or in the unions, trade unions in the US, those were an important contribution as well. There were many gestures, many events that happened that all together contributed to the agreement of releasing the Cuban 5. But I would say, if something was essential in our liberation, was the work of solidarity from many countries, from people in Cuba and from people in Britain as well, through the years, helping the case to be known about. Because remember that the mainstream media prevent our case to be known by the people for many years, and our friends around the world. How could we forget of those vigils in front of U.S. embassies and consulates around the Britain, and in Canada, even in the U.S., in many other countries? How could we forget that? It was all those efforts together, all that solidarity movement through the years together that set the 5 free, and for that we are grateful every single day of our lives. And Nancy is a good friend. Don't worry, Industriales team gonna win this year. Have faith. It's not looking good now, but we're gonna win. Nancy, I'm very proud of the work of CDR in Cuba. We, as I mentioned before, we have been knocking at every door, because there are elderly people, there are disabled people, people with disabilities, all kind of people that cannot go out in the middle of a pandemic and buy their own food or buying the drugs from the drugstore. And we have neighbors, CDR members, knocking at their doors, buying their food from them, or their drugs for them, taking them to their houses, and helping in many ways. We have been giving speeches, educating people in the dangers of the pandemic and the measures that have been taken in different stages. And right now, for example, we have a problem with the visitors, because there are many Cubans coming from the US, for example, and they don't go to hotels, and they go everywhere around the country to the families' houses. And some of them said, I'm going to this place, and then they finish up going to another place. And it's very difficult to keep control of those people and test them against the COVID and make them complete the quarantine. So the CDRs are having a role in that too, because they know in which neighborhood there are visitors from other countries that are supposed to be in quarantine, and they encourage the families to keep in their house, to please observe all measures and respect all measures established to prevent the pandemic in that regard, we are doing a great job. And as I said, I'm very proud of the work that the CDRs are doing.
Well, thanks, Gerardo. Richard, I know you've done quite a lot on our government's response to coronavirus, and obviously you represent a constituency of thousands of people. So perhaps you want to say a bit about the different responses and some of the lessons from Cuba.
Well, what we've seen in our country, unfortunately, is a situation where the government hasn't mobilised the state in the interests of the 99%, in the interest of the vast majority of the population, and they haven't put saving lives and livelihoods first, which is why we've ended up with one of the worst death rates, sadly, and also our economy is the hardest hit in the G7. So I would prefer it if our country adopted a zero COVID strategy. And what you saw was really the reluctance of the state to intervene on the side of the majority. So the lockdown in March started too late, was eased too early. People were being encouraged to go out and spend before it was safe to do so, go out and go to commercial properties before it was safe to do so. So we've got different examples from around the world of how the power of the state is and isn't used, and also in whose interests the power of the state is and isn't used. And I don't think that in our country, sadly, the power of the state has successfully been used in the interests of the majority, nor has it been competently or successfully used at all. But if, Rob, I can just take a quick liberty to ask a very quick question to Gerardo while I'm on. Shakespeare said that our reputation is the immortal part of us. And I was reflecting when I was thinking about your story in your life, that what often gets people through the hard times when they're doing the right thing at great personal cost is knowing that other people know they are doing the right thing. But of course, for a period, whilst you were in Miami, infiltrating these terrorist groups, very few people, I presume, knew that you were doing the right thing. In fact, there may have been people you went to school with and grew up with in Cuba that heard and were surprised about what Gerardo was up to, thinking that maybe he has defected, he's gone and joined these groups. So what gave you the resolve to carry on getting information to stop the dangerous terrorist plans, whilst knowing that there'll be many people who actually thought you were genuinely a part of those groups?
First of all, knowing that some people, men and women, have done before we do, that encourages us, because we have been victims of terrorism for many years, and more than 2,000 Cubans have suffered in their own skin the terrorism. And terrorism against Cuba has caused many deaths, and every Cuban knows that. So when we had the chance to assume that mission, we didn't hesitate. We also knew that some people had done it, some brave people have done it before we did it ourselves. And probably some people are gonna need to do it as far as the terrorism doesn't stop in the US. Right now, these days, believe it or not, there are terrorists in US territories encouraging and paying for terrorist attacks on Cuba. And they have total impunity by the US authorities. They even go to the social media, Facebook or Twitter, and brag about their actions, and brag about their encouragement for people in Cuba to commit terrorist attacks. And that is done in a country that says to have a war against terrorism, that sends troops to every corner of the world, assuming or portraying that they have a war against terrorism. And still they have terrorists of Cuban origin in their own soil, in their own territory, paying for terrorist attacks in Cuba with total impunity. That's something that is unbelievable, but it's still happening today. So back on those days, we knew the importance of the mission we were accomplishing. So we knew somebody had to do it, and that's why we didn't have any regret, and we assume it just like that. And I want to take the opportunity before we finish to tell you that you, Richard, on behalf of Cubans, I would like to express my respect to you and to the other MPs that not only supported the cause of the Cuban Five, which I have to say it was an unpopular cause, because some politicians around the world, when our families knock at their doors, they say, oh, you know what, spies, that's not a good thing for a politician to be supporting. This is not a good cause to be supported by a politician, because it's not popular. Talking about spies, they were caught in the US, so they had to be spies. And we have some people giving that kind of response when our families ask for help. And on the other hand, we have politicians, people like you, and some other MPs in Britain that were able to recognize, to identify a just cause, and were able to recognize that justice was on our side, no matter how popular or unpopular the cause was. And history demonstrated that you were right. So for that, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gerardo. I'm going to give you both a very quick moment to sum up, really. Just we haven't got long, but if you just want to say a couple of words. I know it's been a wonderful meeting and a conversation between you both, and also Barbara. But I was thinking about the messages we might want to be taking out there, particularly to perhaps Joe Biden or perhaps to the British government, but also to people around the country. If you could kind of think about that in your summing up. But Richard, if you want to just say a few words to sum up at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Well, firstly, a brief message to many socialist activists in this country who obviously take a particular interest in Cuba. I'd ask people, and myself included, to reflect upon the experience of Gerardo, the other members of the Cuban Five, and of course the Cuban people. And when we find things tough in our own political activities, to reflect upon what they have been through. Someone who fought in a mission in Angola and helped to strike a decisive blow against apartheid. Someone who was, in Gerardo's case, separated from his family for many years, thwarting terrorist attacks against his country and against the Cuban system. Someone in Gerardo's case who was then put in jail unjustly for many years, and at no point did he do any deals in order to get a shorter sentence. Despite that pressure, despite those circumstances, he carried on and did what he considered to be his duty. So that should make us all reflect that whilst we all have our own struggles, others in other parts of the world have faced far, far tougher struggles for their politics and have succeeded regardless of that. In relation to my reflections upon the British government and the UK government, we all need to be campaigning here in our country for an end to the blockade. That is the greatest thing, the greatest contribution that we as campaigners can make to support the self-determination of the Cuban people. That will help support the Cuban economy, will help to raise living standards further in Cuba and help them to maintain and further advance the gains of the Cuban Revolution in health, education, and in other aspects of their system. And I want the UK's attitude towards Cuba, which has been, as we've reflected upon earlier, different to that of the Trump administration, to remain more positive, as we hope the Biden administration continues the positive moves made by the Obama administration in relation to Cuba. I think we're in a good position in this country to lobby our government and to lobby our politicians in relation to our government having a positive attitude towards Cuba, and in relation to our government continuing to vote against the blockade when that issue comes up at the United Nations. Because now we're in a situation, thanks to the tourist industry, which had expanded in Cuba since the 1990s, where so many people from our communities, from so many different backgrounds, have had the opportunity to visit Cuba. And if people have been there, it's very hard to do the job that the right-wing media and some of the political establishment has tried to do, of demonizing the Cuban people, of demonizing the Cuban system, of delegitimizing the Cuban people's right to self-determination. So I think we're in a good position to make the call for an end to the blockade. And I think we should do all we can also to publicize the drive for the Henry Reeve Medical Brigade to be given the Nobel Peace Prize. There can be no greater example of the values of humanity put into practice than going around the world, saving lives, going around the world, improving lives. That's what Cuban medics have always done throughout the Cuban Revolution. It's a form of internationalism and socialism in practice that everybody, socialist or not, can fully support. And I just want to end my comments by thanking Gerardo for the example he's shown to people around the world, for the difference he's made in his life, in Cuba, in Angola, and in Miami. It's not too much to say that there will be people alive in Cuba and in other countries today who wouldn't be alive had it not been for Gerardo, the Miami Five, and others. People shouldn't forget, for example, the Italian tourist that died as a result of one of the terrorist attacks. The terrorist attacks were aimed at the Cuban people. The terrorist attacks were aimed at taking the lives of those who visited Cuba as tourists in order to strangle the economy, in order to scare people away from visiting Cuba. So there are people alive today all around the world because of that mission that Gerardo and others undertook in the greatest difficulty, in the greatest danger. And I'm so glad to see him here, sat in Cuba as a member of the Cuban Parliament and as the chair of the National Committees for the Defence of the Revolution.
That's absolutely brilliant and inspiring words, Richard. So thank you very much for those words. They really were brilliant. Gerardo, follow that. Some final words from you, Gerardo.
Thank you very much for those kind words. I have to take the opportunity because in a few days, on December 17th, as we mentioned earlier, it's going to be the 6th anniversary of the return of the remaining 3 of the Cuban Five to Cuba. And taking advantage that there are people of Cuban Solidarity Campaign watching, and some more friends around the world that were part of the Solidarity movement, I would like to say that there is not one single day in our lives that we don't remember and thank the people like you that made possible the freedom of the Miami Five, the Cuban Five. So there is not one single day when we don't feel grateful for the work that you did. And still, we would like to keep counting on you and on your efforts and on your solidarity to get rid of the US blockade against Cuba, which affects not only, as they would like to say, the Cuban government, but every single Cuban, kids, elderly people, women, men, everybody in Cuba is affected by the US blockade. And we know that if one day we were able to achieve the freedom of the Cuban Five, one day we're going to be celebrating the end of the US blockade against Cuba, and it's going to be thanks to the solidarity of friends like you. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you, Gerardo, for those kind words. And believe me when I say it, we are with you always, brother. We are with you always. So I'm sorry to all of our listeners and viewers who had more questions. There were questions from all over the world tonight. It's been a really wonderful event and a really wonderful audience. Please, before we wrap up, a few mentions. Sign up to YouTube, follow us on Facebook. and Twitter if you'd like to be notified of all these events, obviously. I'd like to thank all of our speakers this evening, to Her Excellency, the Cuban Ambassador, Barbara Montalvo, of course, but particularly to our two main speakers, to Richard Burgon MP. And Richard, I really was moved by your words. I'm sure the audience were moved. They were heartfelt and incredibly powerful testimonies as to why we are all involved in solidarity on an ongoing basis. So thank you so much for your support over so many years and going forward, I'm sure. Thank you so much for that. And particularly, I would like to thank our very, very special guest, Gerardo Hernández. It really has been a wonderful meeting. We're very, very pleased you could find the time to join us. Please do send my love and everybody's love to Adriana and the kids, because your family is part of the five. I remember Adriana and the other family members, the mothers, the wives and children traveling around the world to Britain and other places to campaign for your release. So your victory, your freedom is their victory and their freedom also. So we shouldn't forget the role that they all played. So thank you so much. As the ambassador said, this is the last meeting of 2021 that we're planning. And I want to wish everybody watching here tonight, all the members and the affiliates of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, a very, very happy Christmas and a new year. And thank you for your support this year. And we look forward to continue to work in solidarity with Cuba in 2021. Thank you all so much.
Si quieres decirle algo, puedes conversar con él.
Thank you, Rob. It was great.
1 minute.
Greetings to everybody there.
Okay, I've ended the stream.
Okay, brilliant.